Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Harry Haney, and I lead the Supply Chain Center here at Loyola University, Chicago. Seth, would you like to advance the slide, please? Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody to our webinar today, hosted by the Office of Sustainability, the Baumhart Center, and the Supply and Value Chain Center here at Loyola University Chicago. We're very pleased to be hosting today's conversation about a sustainable Chicago for all. Next. So very shortly, we're going to turn it over to our fantastic panelists, Michael Berkshire, who is with the City of Chicago Victoria Lakes Battle from IFF, and Vincent Williams with the Chicago Minority Supplier Development Council, and our own Seth Green will be the moderator. We also like to know who has joined us, so please feel free to introduce yourself using the chat function, and this will also be where we encourage you to ask questions of our presenters, as we have scheduled plenty of time for Q&A. The webinar is being recorded, and we will post it to the Baumhart Center's page of past events within the next 24 hours. Next slide. Here at Loyola, we strive to be a leader in sustainability for our region, and we are very proud of the initiatives, both academically and with our physical infrastructure. We've been consistently recognized for our sustainability efforts with awards from the third gold rating and star efforts are anchored in our tradition as a Jesuit institution committed to social justice and mutual respect. Next. My colleagues working with me on this webinar are Seth Green, who's the founding director of the Baumhart Center, and Aaron Dernbaugh, who is the director of sustainability. Aaron's office is actually housed in the Institute of Environmental Sustainability, where we have a new master's in environmental science and sustainability, or we have professional certificates in sustainability, reporting, GIS, and environmental law and policy as well. The Baumhart Center and the Supply Chain Center are both housed in the Quinlan School of Business in the Water Tower campus. And we both have innovative programs connecting business to purpose. And Quinlan is one of the top business schools in the world, leading globally on social purpose, and has been recognized by the Financial Times as excellent in 4 categories on responsible business education, with only 4 other business schools in the world achieving that mark. There's some programs of note, including the first of its kind Baumhart Scholars MBA at the intersection of business and purpose, and a soon to be forthcoming Master's in Sustainability and Supply Chain Management, as well as awards programs for businesses leading on responsible and sustainable business. Next slide. This is the last, this 4-part webinar series is meant to explore even more common ground regarding sustainability and social justice, and this is the last in the series of 4. And you can find the recordings of the other 3 on the past events page of the Baumhart Center. So for now, let me turn it over to Seth to introduce our presenters and share a few words. Seth?
Thank you so much, Harry, and thank you all for being with us. I'm going to be brief because we really want to get to the presentations. I am just going to say that this issue of sustainability for all could not be more urgent and could not be more timely in terms of the reckoning that we are finally having as a country. Yesterday in the New York Times, there was a powerful report that Blacks are 75% more likely to live near hazardous waste. If you look back at the social determinants of health and you look at the drivers that explain the inequities that are becoming more and more visible in this pandemic, environmental factors are the lead. And so as we think about sustainability, we need to be thinking about it as a core social justice issue, and we need to understand that the way that we pursue sustainability has dramatic impacts either in advancing equity or reducing it. And so as we thought about this series around sustainability, we wanted to make sure that we close with what we believe is the most important intersection of all. How do we ensure that we include everyone in sustainability, most of all the people who have been on all data counts left behind and ultimately hurt most by our failure to take our environment seriously over history? And so with that as context, what we're going to do is we're going to hear from three phenomenal leaders who we admire for taking very different pieces of this puzzle of sustainability for all. We're going to hear their introductions, and then we're going to turn over to a few questions I have for them, and then quickly we're going to get into questions that you all have for them. And so let me start by introducing Vicki Lakes-Faddle. She is the Executive Director for the Chicago region of IFF. She is also one of the kindest and most inspiring leaders that I know. She has been incredibly generous with her time in giving that to Loyola students, and it's part of her broader commitment to really inspiring the next generation. And so, Vicki, can I turn it over to you to share about IFF?
Thank you for that, Seth. And thank you for your kind words. It is my pleasure to be of service and to pour into others in the way that many have poured into me. Before I get on and begin to talk about IFF, I want to bring myself into the room as we talk about sustainability, and a part of which we can't ignore the race conversation. And so I wanted to just briefly, as I said, bring myself in by addressing aspects of my identity. I am an African-American woman. I am a wife and a mom. I am neighborhood mother, auntie / godmama to all. I've spent my entire career in community development finance, so that's a little bit over 30 years. I am a Southsider, born and raised in the community of Roseland. And I mention all those things to you because as we get into our conversation, then I think that my response is fueled by all those aspects of my identity. And I happen to work at a wonderful organization that actually celebrates all those aspects of who I am, and that place is called IFF. And so a little bit about IFF for those of you who may not be familiar with us, but we are a mission-driven lender, real estate consultant, developer that helps communities thrive by creating opportunities for low-income communities and people with disabilities. Next slide, please. We do that through equipping nonprofits with meeting their facilities and financial needs. And so here's a statement from our CEO that just gives a little bit about how we think about things. And so we don't take a transactional approach to our work. It really has to do with outcomes in mind that promote neighborhood change in ways that are honored, respected, and most importantly, wanted by the communities that we serve. Next slide, please. So we have a mission to strengthen nonprofits and the communities they serve by providing leadership, capital, and real estate solutions. So I know in the first slide, I mentioned the things that we do, but we lend to and support nonprofits almost exclusively with the exception of our healthy food work and our affordable housing work. And because we believe that nonprofits, health, human services are anchors for community change. And as we enter this space of discussing sustainability, I think that we can all agree that the necessity for community anchors is critical now more than ever. So our target audience serves low-income communities. So keep in mind that what we do is our work is used to strengthen nonprofits as the anchor on the premise that these are largely direct services providers. And so they're the ones that are in touch with people. And so at no point do I want any of my remarks not to honor the space in which the organizations that we serve. Our efforts are intended to lighten their load a little bit so they can go out and do the work that they're uniquely equipped to do. Next slide, please. IFF believes that we can provide transformational outcomes, not just by the lending and finance piece. So what you see here are a series of concentric circles where community development is in the middle. And I'm sorry about that beeping. I don't know how to turn it off. So you guys can have a chuckle at my expense. I can't figure it out. But the real estate development and consulting practice was largely a complement to our lending space because generally facilities follow programs. So if we really think about this thing, that a domestic violence center generally needs a place to operate. But could we agree that probably those that work for a domestic violence center maybe don't have the skill set or even want to desire to acquire the skills to launch a building project? And so what we do is we try to lighten their load by having a consulting arm that can consult around just space utilization, location, so many different things as a unique complement to the lending and finance conversation. And I mention that because I think that it's something that we often will probably inform some of our later discussion around really understanding what it takes to move the needle in the community development context. You'll see that the yellow circle also references research. We're in a space where we believe that we have to follow the data. There's so much emphasis in recent months, weeks, years around what the data suggests, but do we really read it? And in the context of a conversation about race, are we asking, I don't know that it's that we're not asking the right questions. I want to push us a little bit today to really ask ourselves whether or not we're really prepared to receive the answer. So we have adopted this mantra that everything starts with research. And so I'm sure some of us, maybe more than a handful of us, really can reflect and really think about things that didn't work all that well. It didn't go necessarily according to plan. And I would submit to you that probably there were some things in the data that were telling us that the outcome that we desired perhaps couldn't be achieved with the methodology that we were pursuing. So we really are trying to center research to influence and inform the other areas of our practice. And you'll see that big bubble that's in gray around public policy. At the end of the day, none of this work supporting our nonprofits exists without affecting the public environment and making sustainable change. Next slide, please. I wanted to also say that in addition to what IFF does, a couple years back, we started on this strategic journey. And one of our pillars a few years back that was adopted was our equity, diversity, and inclusion work. And I share that with you because we started building out a framework and trying to work on ourselves first to really think seriously about what the application of an equity lens really meant in the context of our work and among those that we serve. And so I hope that we can talk a little bit more about what that looks like. The last thing I'll say before I turn it over to my partners on the panel is that there are a few things that I hope to explore with you today around what COVID is teaching us. One of those is that our current approach to supporting community isn't always offered in sustainable ways. And if you're interested, we can go down that path later. One of the other things is that I'm coming to understand that we really need to wrestle with how we define risk and value. I want to explore what we value, what we don't, why we value it, why we don't, and how that plays out in our risk assessment, because one of my partners on the panel deals with environmental work, and in the lending world, that's considered risky. And I'm coming to understand risk as things that we don't necessarily understand and may not have invested the right amount of time to really understand and simplify it. And I know that to be true because IFF supports nonprofits, which generally is not necessarily highest on the radar of local and mainstream financial institutions. And the final thing I'll leave you with is that I think we really need to expand our thinking around who the first responders should include. So yes, we use the terminology in terms of those associated with the medical field, but I submit to you that now more than ever, the first responders have been those that have been entrenched in community, who've been labeled often, who've been equipped uniquely to reach hard to reach populations.
Thank you, Vicki, for a very powerful opening and really setting a lot of the big questions that we hope to talk about, hopefully bravely, to your point, over the course of this virtual conversation. Michael, we are coming to you. Michael Berkshire is the North Region Lead Planner for the Department of Planning and Development at the City of Chicago. And he's been part of the city for more than 15 years and so seen it over numerous administrations. And we really value your perspective as someone who has been at this intersection of two city goals, sustainability and equity.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Seth. And I'm very happy to be here today. It looks like we have almost 200 people online, so it's very exciting. And if you can go back one slide, Seth, I just wanted, oh, maybe it's the second slide. Yeah, that one, sorry. I just wanted to show you this slide very quickly because the Department of Planning recently went through a major reorganization. And with that, my job actually changed within the department. And the map on the right side of the slide shows that we divided the city into 7 new planning regions. And within each region, we have a group of 2 to 4 planners that are specifically working on land use plans, specific projects, neighborhood plans, etc. And I am the new lead for the North region, which is basically everything north of Division and east of the river, all the way up to Evanston. And so if you could switch over to the next slide, Seth. And I just wanted to, during my brief introduction, I wanted to talk about 2 things that the Department of Planning does to support and promote more sustainable development and also more resilient development. And the first is the Chicago Sustainable Development Policy, which has been around since 2004, but we recently updated it about 3 years ago. We wanted the policy to be more flexible and also be more contextual to new development projects. And very simply, how the policy works is that projects receiving assistance from the city, so whether it be financial assistance, such as tax increment financing, or if they're receiving money from our Department of Housing's various financial incentives to develop new affordable housing, and also historical projects receiving Class L assistance. So all of those projects, along with planned developments, which are developments that exceed a certain size, either height, number of units, square footage, and they need special approvals to actually happen. And all those projects also include all projects that are located along our river system. So planned developments and projects receiving financial assistance are required to include sustainable elements or strategies in the design and construction. And we're promoting a variety of sustainable strategies within this policy, but most of them are related to our overall sustainability goals and objectives for the city. So a lot of our biggest issues in Chicago are energy efficiency. Over 70% of our carbon footprint is the energy used in buildings. And also stormwater management is very important. We have a combined sewer system in Chicago. So during heavy rainfalls, that system becomes overwhelmed, and that a combination of stormwater and sewage comes up into people's basements, and we have street flooding. So that's a chronic issue that people from all over the city suffer from. And as well as we're looking at ways that we can promote use of alternative transportation. Our beloved green roofs are still in there. But the one thing that we did add this last round is also something that has to do more with like the social aspect of sustainability, where we're giving projects points or credit if a portion of their workforce comes from hard to employ population. So that's something new that we're testing in the most recent update. And then something else that we recently completed that I wanted to briefly mention was our Resilient Corridors project. The photo on the right is a photograph of a completed project along 16th Street in the North Lawndale neighborhood. The project was that we built 10 new what we're calling stormwater landscapes. So we're actually directing stormwater from surrounding streets and alleys into these new landscapes. And we built them in, all 10 of them are on the south and west sides of Chicago. We chose the corridors that they are in based on a pretty extensive analysis that we did to look at where are the most vulnerable populations in Chicago in terms of extreme weather events? So again, as I mentioned, our extreme weather events are heat as well as heavy rainfalls. So it's no surprise to everyone on the call, I'm sure, that the south and west sides were where we found were the most vulnerable populations. So we built all 10. They're in the West Humboldt as well as the North Lawndale neighborhoods. And we actually did just receive another grant to build the 11th Resilient Corridor project, which will be a new orchard on 5th Avenue in the East Garfield neighborhood. So with that, again, it's just what kind of DPD, Department of Planning, is doing. I'm here to represent planning, not the entire city. So those are a few things that we're working on to promote sustainability and resilience.
Thank you so much, Michael. And now I am pleased to introduce our final panelist, Vincent Williams, who is the president and CEO of the Chicago Minority Supplier Development Council. He is also a friend and someone who I have long admired for his leadership on these issues. Most recently, prior to becoming CEO, he was at the YWCA, where he was the Vice President of Economic Empowerment. And I mean, truly an ally on these issues, widely known and respected. And so, Vincent, let me turn it over to you. Oh, and you're on mute.
How's that? Perfect. Thank you so much, Seth. Thank you, Harry Haney, the Baumhart Center, Supply and Value Chain Center, the Loyola's Office of Sustainability, and my fellow panelists, as well as the webinar attendees, for the opportunity to contribute to this conversation. As Vicki mentioned earlier, I too am a native Southsider, the Morgan Park neighborhood to be exact, but my family did own a skating rink in the Roseland area in the late 70s and 80s. So Vicki, Roseland is in the house. Okay, a sustainable Chicago for all. Sustainability, right? It's defined as a noun, the ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level, and avoidance of the depletion of natural resources in order to maintain an ecological balance. This, to me, is such an important dialogue to have today because this pandemic has caused many of us to rethink how we coexist, how we live, how we play, and more importantly, how we plan, right? As many of you know, here in Chicago, it's forced us to analyze our day-to-day work, our economic viability, our culture, the resources that we have, that we're using, and exactly just how big our shoulders are, right? City of big shoulders. I believe that in order to maintain a certain rate or level here in Chicago, a sustainable mode of operations, we must come together as an entire well-oiled ecosystem. This is of public and private organizations that continue to engage and have what I'm going to say is this positive impact, this social impact, and this economic impact. This impact should not only be measured, but it should also be shared, not just planned and shelved for reviewing at another time, but again, revisited and making sure that it's actionable items. The Chicago Minority Supplier Development Council is a premier organization that's part of 23 affiliates nationally. And our mission is to connect, advocate, develop, and certify minority business enterprises. What we know is that the business case for supplier diversity is there, right? But we as leaders, we as buyers, we as consumers simply have to practice how are we going to diversify our spend? And that is enthralled in sustainability. Intentionally procuring or working with diverse suppliers across all industries to make a conscious, positive economic impact. That is sustainable. Our respective organizational agendas should never have to compete in this realm with one another, but instead they should complement one another. And that's another key thing for, I think, a sustainable Chicago. As Seth mentioned, I try intentionally to be considered a thought leader, right, here in Chicago. But I'm confident that we can attain this sustainable Chicago by intentionally focusing on a few different items. And here's my list. The first one, investing, right? Invest your time, invest your money, invest your energy, invest resources. And again, that can be financial or non-financial. But what this ultimately does is allow us again to have and determine what these actionable items are, show that impact, that positive impact, if you will, and share those KPIs, which is what we all want and need. Second item, developing ourselves and developing our strategic partners, right? Consistent educational opportunities, just like this one here that we're participating in today. Develop this economic impact, showcasing the efficient use of resources. That's how we're going to maintain this balance. That's a root of sustainability. Third item, connecting. This is critical, very, very critical for sustainability, as connectivity and collaboration ensures that our entire ecosystem continues to address the needs necessary for a viable future. I think that's just the writing right there on the wall in bold print. Connecting also encourages the sustainability in the form of community. And I think one of the panelists mentioned, or both of the panelists mentioned earlier, how important community is. This community should live in the form of intentionally working together to make sure that we continue to thrive. Learning, uncovering, discovering about one another's services, the products, what drives us, what our mission are. And then finally, advocating. Advocating for justice. Vicki mentioned earlier, this Black Lives Matter movement, the George Floyd, the Breonna Taylor murders, it's all real, right? We've seen the videos, we've read the stories. This movement is one that deserves complete advocacy, not just ridiculing or the punchline for a joke, or even to compensate for someone's guilt. Advocating is what I think we, as organizations that can make a difference, need to eliminate racism and to promote equity across all lines and all levels. Sustainability is the avoidance of the depletion of resources. Now, that definition that I mentioned earlier said natural resources. I'm saying all resources. And that's in order for us to maintain this balance, but to also know that we will continue to go forward. These 4 intentional focus areas that I just mentioned, investing, developing, connecting, advocating, they're all inclusive of the pillars that we here at the Chicago Minority Supplier Development Council rely on. But together, in order to create, in order to nurture, in order to maintain what I consider a sustainable Chicago for all, then we collectively must control the future that we want, the future that we need, the future that we deserve, right? My colleagues, Vicky, Michael, Harry, Seth, everyone shared all these incredible nuggets of information on sustainability. But with all this in mind, I think that in order for us to truly have a sustainable Chicago, please put your mask on. Thank you so much, Seth.
Well, you can certainly see why I called Vincent a thought leader. We are so grateful to all of our panelists. And I just want to echo the big theme that I think emerges, which is that sustainability is about both natural resources and human resources. And to the points that have been made, it's about an ecosystem where we not only care for our planet, but we care for our people. And that means in a world as unjust and inequitable as ours, making sure that we are very intentional about diversifying our spend and thinking differently about our system so that we are sure that we are in a place of sustainability and equity as we make our individual choices, and then advocating for the many places where we need change on a policy level in order to move the needle. What I want to do in brief, and I'm going to try to go through these questions quickly so that we can then come to your questions as an audience, is just set the stage with a little bit more specificity around areas of opportunity that are seen. And so I'm going to do a kind of past, present, future with our panelists. And so I want to start with where our panelists have historically seen missed opportunities to advance economic development and sustainability together. So we know that we have missed plenty of those opportunities in the past. It's a vast question, but I'm curious if each of you could zero in on one major miss as we look to the past, and then we're going to come to where we are today and where we want to go. And so, Vicki, can I start again with you on that question, and then we'll come to the other panelists?
Sure. So I think I want to address it from the community development perspective. And I think that, you know, our communities have been studied ad nauseum. You know, there's been so much research. Community actors have been invited to planning conversations to be asked what they want, and yet there haven't been resources that have been assembled to advance those interests. And so, in keeping with the things that I elevated around risk and value, I maintain that the value of communities, and let's just be very transparent because we have a lot of labels, but Black and Brown communities, the value of communities of color has to be elevated. And when we allow media outlets to only speak to the violence in communities and to the underperformance of schools, and we don't take an opportunity to step back and honestly assess why, then I don't see how change can really occur. The people who are impacted by the process are rarely included in the ultimate decision-making. And so I think that one opportunity that we have missed, just to sum it all up, is, quite frankly, you know, we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. We have to step outside of ourselves and step outside of our own personal comforts and desires and consider how our actions impact others.
Thank you, Vicki. And I just want to add to what you've just said in terms of how we assess risk and how that impacts so many different marketplaces. I'll put in the chat one example where JP Morgan Chase, in the way that they've looked at these issues, has led to a white to Black disparity among their lending of 41 to 1 between white families they've lent to and Black families. And I mean, it's unbelievable in a city where you have relatively similar populations that you would have that kind of outcome. And to your point, when we start with very poor assumptions and then we factor those in, we get very poor outcomes. And so I'll put that in the chat for others to see. Michael, let's hear your example on this one.
So I would like to, again, focus on the sustainable development policy because as I said, when we updated it 3 years ago, we added, just one strategy that where we try to address the more, the social pillar associated with sustainability. But I think, and we're actually going to be reassembling the committee that helped us update the policy in the next month or two. And the discussion is going to continue with the comprehensive planning process that the city will be initiating in a few months. So there is an opportunity here that I think we can really enhance the policy by looking at ways that we can both protect and enhance culture within the areas where the developments that we're touching are, as well as equity. That's a lens that we've never really truly looked through, when talking about this policy. And like I said, it's been around since 2004, but that's not a discussion that we've had yet. So that's something that I want to bring into the discussion. For instance, another thing that we're looking at in terms of the update is we also I think we're short on how the policy impacts industrial development and all of the social injustice issues associated with industry and where they're located in Chicago. I think it's a very important element that we really need to take a hard look at this time. So those are a few missed opportunities, but we're hoping to address it.
Thank you, Michael. Vincent?
Yeah, I'd love to add. So I think, the fellow panelists just really shared some good information. I love the initiatives that they're taking. As a new leader, and CEO recognized here for an organization that focuses on the minority community and certification. So, we certify minority business enterprises, those that are Black, Hispanic, Asian, and Native American. And that's just inclusive of those that we think have been marginalized and left out of a lot of really what's continuing to move society today. And I think this pandemic has identified some opportunities for us to control that narrative right now going forward. And what I mean by that is that in order for us to, again, keep this sustainability going, or even retool and rethink on how we define sustainability, that this intentionality that I mentioned earlier of making sure that we are diversifying what our spends are, is really a direction that we're looking to go in as an organization. And this is where I'm hoping that the collaboration, the community, everything that we're hearing about and learning about today, how businesses are pivoting, similar to what you're doing now. I used to love attending these, of course, in person, down at the Water Tower Center, but now having to have these virtual webinars is a little bit different because, as you know, I'm about energy. And so feeding off of this energy and providing that energy out there. But what I also love about this opportunity and really what it presents is now we can get to a wider audience. And maybe those that would have missed, and the fact that you're going to record this and can share this going forward, but then those that aren't participating today would also be able to uncover some different ways that they too can provide and assist with having a sustainable future and everything from there going forward. So I hope to just really continue to obtain, I guess, more feedback and more information on how, again, we can coexist during these changing times, but also intentionally go towards making sure that we're all included. And I think that, and as my colleagues mentioned, that equity piece is extremely critical, because even though we may have known about it and it may have been talked about in the past, we still never had that true opportunity to control it. And that's what we can do right now. So I hope to be a part of that.
Thank you. I have one more question for the panelists, and then we're going to turn to your questions. So please put them into the chat because we want to get to them. That was a question about where we've been. As you look to the future, I'm curious if each of you could just speak to what you see as important structural changes we need to make in the policy, business, and nonprofit sectors. You can pick one or you can go cross-sectoral. to move toward a more sustainable Chicago? And I know that's a big picture question, but I'm eager to kind of lay that table, especially for those who want to follow Vincent's vision of advocacy. What should we be advocating for in terms of really important changes? Vincent, just because you're still on my screen, can we come to you first, and then we'll go backward this time in order?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Seth. And I think that, again, having this opportunity to control how we continue to move forward and what's going to be considered sustainable, I think what the future looks like is truly how we can make sure that there's the equity piece that's in there, right? That we are going to the individual respective diverse groups, diversifying our supplier networks, diversifying our dollar spends, and that therefore making it not having essentially a sense of mandatory responsible social responsibility to support across all lines. I think that should be truly the conversation of the future. Everyone should have that on the table. It shouldn't just be passed around, or even there should be a small number like 10% or 20% that was normally in the past some of what those spends were allocated for. It should be, higher percentages, 50%. We know the business case is there. We know it exists, and we know that it contributes positively to how we as organizations continue to grow. And so to put that behind us now when we have the opportunity to control it, that would not be moving forward in the future.
Thank you, Vincent. Michael?
Something that I actually just wanted to kind of announce, because I don't know what the awareness of this new initiative is within the city of Chicago, but I wanted to briefly touch upon Invest Southwest, where actually the city, with the leadership of Mayor Lightfoot, is investing around $750 million in 10 neighborhoods in the south and west sides of Chicago. And, the initial planning is being focused in 10 corridors on the south and west sides. And, they're looking at formerly, viable commercial areas within these neighborhoods that have suffered from, decades of disinvestment. And we're trying to, we want to invest this money in those corridors to help bring in more private development. So augment what we're investing in with private development. And in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be distributing the first set of RFPs, or requests for proposals, for development within 3 of those 10 corridors. And they were opportunity sites that were RFPing that have been brought up through discussions that have been held within those various neighborhoods. So I think it's a very exciting program. And what I have, I'm a north side planner, so I haven't been in the weeds, but I have been trying to push sustainability and resilience as much as possible, so that any new development within these corridors can be the most sustainable and resilient as possible. So we're just, we're trying to make sure that everyone has access to resources in terms of sustainability and resilience. But, we all need to support these projects, because this is just, I think, an amazing initiative, and I think could make a huge impact. So, and I'd be happy to talk more about it. I'm not the perfect person, but anyone that's on the call that wants to learn more about it, please feel free to contact me, and I'll put you in touch with folks that are really in the weeds, so to speak. So,
thank you, Michael. Nikki?
So I think, Seth, is more of a process question, right? So if we envision a future, then I think that there are a lot of issues. And, one of the things, I gave you my identities and presented myself and brought myself into the room because after the senseless murder of George Floyd, and I'm going to just be transparent and frank here, then I didn't realize that I, in many cases, was that Black friend or the one Black person that many of my, that I was, that I represented a spokesperson for the Black community. And I say that glibly and smugly, but I also wanted to illustrate that just sometimes how systemic racism shows up and the unintended harm when we're trying to do good. So I don't mean for my comments to come across as admonitions, but more of a challenge. Nothing, why I didn't understand the dialogue. It took me as an African-American woman married to an African-American man, it took me quite some time, guys, to just catch up to the conversation because there was nothing new. Right. And so I was trying to figure out what it was about the senseless murder of this Black man by a peace officer in broad daylight with his hand in his pocket that made things this time different. And so I decided to work past that kind of and push past it and try to figure out how I could offer something constructive. So first thing is we need to question the why behind the what, right? So things are what they are. And so for my colleagues and friends on this call who do not identify as people of color, stop and take a minute and just, be better observers. That's like an initial step. And start to wrestle with why things are the way that they are. And then hopefully you'll arrive at a place where you realize and are convinced now more than ever that things ought not be. I would also say that it is a mistake to disaggregate the race consideration from any type of planning dialogue, business dialogue in today's environment, because it's going to keep revealing its ugly head as it has throughout the years. And so I think that, our mindset needs to shift where we're a little bit more open and receptive to our biases. And I keep going back to this notion of value and risk because Vincent alluded to it far more eloquently. So I'm just going to say it plain. Vincent shouldn't have to convince those of us to spend more with businesses led by people of color. It shouldn't be, an appeal. So the mere fact that so many minority set-aside programs exist, this goes back to the why behind the what, is a function of the fact that our system is fundamentally flawed and does not value anything that is taught, whether it's community, whether it's business ownership, whatever it is, anything associated with people of color, just really, it is undervalued, is under-resourced, and all of these things. To bring that final point home, then on top of that, we magnify the intensity of the problem because communities of color, businesses of color are disproportionately adversely affected because they can't compensate for coming behind, but yet the burden that they have to meet is so much greater because they're undervalued, because they're considered higher risk, then the pricing is higher, right? There's certain access to mainstream resources that just can't be acquired. In the supplier sense and in the for-profit sense, there's pressure to scale. Well, how do you scale if you can't get access to a letter of credit or a line of credit to demonstrate to the supplier that you're creditworthy? So this thing, we could go on and on and on with all kinds of tangible examples, but I really think that it starts with shifting mindset and assuring that that equity conversation around race always intertwines with the equity conversation around money.
Well, so Vicki, I want to pick up on that because Daryl Billingsley has a question in the chat. Daryl, can you share it directly? And then I'm going to let you respond first, Vicki, and if other panelists have thoughts on that as well, but it ties directly into what you're just talking about. Daryl?
Yes, thanks, Seth, and hello, Vicki. It's true thought that you just mentioned that because I was thinking kind of along the same lines. Like, what can we do? Like, we have these ideas and we have these initiatives. We have a lot of things going on to try to push and promote changing inequities. But what can we do to actually have processes in place and policies that are formed to have more consequences when these things are not adhered to? Like, I feel like people will listen all day, they'll nod their heads, they'll say, you know, well, yeah, I understand it, you know, and even be empathetic to some degree. But there has been a power dynamic, I think, from which this country was started on that we just can't seem to get past. And, you know, I think there's more of a plea to reposition people in positions of power than it is to actually make things that are inequitable more equally resourced. So how do we what do we do to, what would your suggestion be to actually have policies that, you know, have more consequences than just, you know, talks of asking people to do things out of the goodness of their heart? Because I think we're beyond that to some degree.
Thank you, Daryl.
And Daryl, do you identify as African American?
Yes, ma'am.
Then I would encourage you to support your local public official. So one of the other areas that we really struggle in largely communities of color, is that members of our legislature just are under-resourced as well. And so whether that's making photocopies, whether that's being in the room where policies and practices are being formulated, you can actually influence the process. I'm working on a body of work now for a state rep. I have been absolutely blown away by just how poorly resourced and under-resourced members of the Black Caucus at every level, national, state, local, where they can't even advance an agenda because they're answering the phone or responding to emails and having to be available to answer the door. And I highlight these disparities and inequities, but Daryl, that's a very practical way. Get involved in, you know, and start influencing those that make policies, make your ideas heard. The other thing is, because that's where you'll learn more about how the system works. And once you fundamentally understand the system, then you can find those entry points in order to change and influence it. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
I'd love to add to that too, Daryl, and well said too, Vicki. What I think, brother, is that this process right now, this change, this necessary change, it's not an easy one, right? It is going to take some time. It's going to take some cultivating. Although we feel like it's just as simple as putting these policies and procedures in place and then acting on it, you have to think of, like you said, you know, it's 400 years that racism has existed. We've been oppressed and we've been intentionally redlined and marginalized and declined from access to capital and declined from living in neighborhoods. I think honestly, you know, to not really take this conversation into a race talk, but to acknowledge that really what we're dealing with right now with those individuals that don't want to wear a mask or just refuse because it's just their right. Think of what it is that we've had to go through as a people. We've been forced to socially acclimate to using a certain water fountain, sitting in a certain side of the bus, not being able to live in this neighborhood or purchase items in that particular neighborhood, which is why we end up forming our own across all lines, right? Hispanic, Asian, Native American, all of them existing there. And so now during this pandemic, because we're all businesses, all organizations are forced to essentially now acclimate, adjust and saying, wait a minute, I can't just do this, or I can't, you know, lives have changed, things have changed. And so because that process isn't easy, we're able to adapt a little bit more. We've been dealing with it for so long. But the non-people of color are just kind of like, you can't tell me what to do. And I'm like, oh, but if we want to sustain, if we want this existing world right now to keep going, you gotta change, right? And that's where, again, this re-education, this retooling, this rethinking, however you want to determine or classify it, is critical. We get to control this narrative going forward. And that's what I love about all the people that are really jumping on the various movements, but really just highlighting and showcasing that we're not going to take this anymore. We're not going to live with those old laws that exist. We don't want those statutes that truly don't represent who we are today as an ecosystem that wants to sustain and keep going forward. And you know, I don't have all the answers. This is what I love about opportunities like this, is that, again, I can learn and hear different things. I love what Vicki said about supporting, you know, your actual legislative, people that are there too, because that advocacy work is really what's going to help that change happen. And then again, it's not just talking about it, it's truly doing something, but having a measurable outcome and then being able to see that impact.
We're going to take one more question from Emma Westfall, and then I'm going to offer a 60-second final remarks to each of our panelists to answer and share any final words of wisdom. Emma?
Hey, thanks, Seth. Just for some context, I graduated with a BBA from Loyola, and I'm also an incoming Baumhart Scholar. And I have to say, I'm also a professional member of Chicago MSCC, so shout out to Chicago MSCC. They do some awesome capacity building work. But Vincent, as you mentioned, you're kind of talking about retooling education. And basically, I'm kind of thinking that a lot of business and even nonprofit folks are kind of unprepared to meet the moment as they are with the education that we have. And I'm kind of wondering, you know, how do we integrate everything that we've talked about on this panel, circular economics, sustainable management, diverse procurement? How do we make that the default instead of making, you know, conventional economics, which is exclusive of a lot of minority-owned businesses? Do you have any ideas around that?
Yeah, so the final point for each of you, and we really want to know, like, how do we change the paradigm where we get to these things at the beginning and we have them as core rather than having them, frankly, in a cleanup mode almost, where we're making up for our failures for equity originally. So Vincent, get us started, and we'll aim for your snapshot answers for time.
Yeah, sure. No, and great question. Thanks so much for asking that. What I really think that it's about is essentially similar to what I mentioned earlier, is that this re-education and retooling, because those that are in the positions now, the chief procurement officers, the buying officers, the CEOs of these organizations need to know that there's a whole nother set, or we need to reset the way that we have done things in the past. I think for so long, and those that are in the positions are just fine with the status quo. Hey, this has worked. You know, I can show some numbers here, but how about increasing those numbers or getting some new blood into these positions that really get what we're looking to do here, right? And so that's where, again, I think that re-education comes in. So this can be in the form of webinars or discussion groups, different ways so that they can see the true outcome, but have that older stapled chief procurement officer meet with this newer generation procurement officer and have them peer mentor, right? Which is a lot what the Baumhart Center really, focuses on is how we can collectively work together. And I think that will be some good steps toward changing these processes and making sure that we're going to be sustainable.
Thank you, Vincent. Michael?
I would like to refer back to a couple of things that Vincent said at the beginning about connecting and advocating. And just one example of something that we're trying to change, again, within the Department of Planning, is that how we issue requests for proposals. Before, we would just send them out and distribute them without much input from the community where the project is residing. And now we're setting up a new system where we will actually go out into the community and get, much needed feedback on what they would like to see there. What are the important elements or issues in the surrounding area, and what is the context, and what is the culture? And that's something that it's going to require a big change, and it might add a little bit more time to our process, but it's a much needed change.
Thank you, Michael. Vicki, you have our last word.
I would just say, look at who's at the table, examine, who's occupying seats, who isn't, who's not there, and then also consider things from different points of view. The very best analogy is if you love little people like I do, then the children, they just have a different perspective. And if you get down on the floor and look at things from their perspective, it's amazing how it just changes your whole perspective on things. I invite you to take that approach with respect to advancing your work, Emma.
Well, I just want to say a huge thank you. I mean, the conversation has been about how we need to look through more lenses and we need to be more serious about truly putting sustainability in the form that Vincent defined for us, which is about human and natural resources at the center of everything we do. And you all have given us insights that ultimately will help us all to grow new lenses and to be more intentional about all of the planning that we do personally and professionally to be at this intersection. So obviously this conversation is to be continued, but you have sparked so many important thoughts, and I am enormously grateful for my own learning today alongside our audience. So thank you, thank you, thank you, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with all of you.